Oh, something I meant to tell you. So I went down to our hometown yesterday to visit my parents,
Oh, yes.
and they had a one of those Amazon Echoes
Hmm.
that my brother got them. Brother Y, I guess.
Okay. Yes. We have to distinguish the siblings here.
Yes, but we had fun playing with that. But I did test it, and I said, Alexa, play the Two Big Geeks podcast. And right away, it came up with our latest episode and started playing it.
Wow. Wow. That's both exciting and frightening at the same time. I wonder how long. So you named one of our recent episodes Grumpy Old Men. I wonder for how long we will resist, both of us, getting one of these voice digital assistants, because it does sort of seem like it's trending towards ubiquity.
Yeah.
And so resisting acquiring one is going to soon become, just based on principle.
Yeah.
So I wonder if/when we will succumb to the constant surveillance machine that the tech companies want to roll out into our lives.
Yeah, this is the first time I've played around with one of those. It was kind of weird. My parents were somewhat bemused by it, but haven't quite figured out its use case, I think, for them. But they like the fact that you could just tell it to play music and it'll just play music.
Well, I mean, if it disperses the podcast more readily into the populace, I suppose that is a plus.
Yeah. It was just bizarre, just having this little internet connected device just all of a sudden spew out our voices out of the ether.
What was the timeline? Like, how long did it take between the request and the playing?
It was immediate. It just say, here's the latest episode, and it started playing. And it
Really?
was our two knucklehead voices coming out of the little speaker.
Wow. That's pretty wild. Because even, these kids today, they can go on YouTube, right? And get any song they can imagine.
Yeah.
It's like an infinite jukebox, which when we were growing up would have been absolutely mind-blowing. But even then, you have to go to YouTube, search for it, find the song you want, and then click it. There is somewhat of a lag. But with these things you're saying, it's fairly immediate, eh?
Yeah. It recognized what I said and found the right podcast and said, here, I'm going to play the latest episode. Here you go.
Wow.
You'll have to get one so you can listen to yourself.
I think episode 48 is going to be, oh my God, Tom, I bought a voice assistant. Forever I shall not be the same. Once my refrigerator or toaster becomes internet connected, then I think I've passed a certain point of no return. That to me is the litmus test in my home. Maybe not so much the refrigerator, because you could see that coming first, but if you have an internet connected toaster, I think that pretty much signals the end times.
Yeah, they had their Alexa hooked up to their landline phone as well, so they could receive and send, and make calls on it just by voice activation.
Wow.
They have a Nest thermostat too. I don't know if that's connected in. My brother shows up at the house with all these tech gadgets for them to use.
Is it like in the movie Babe where they bring the farmer a fax machine?
Right. It's like, what are we going to do with this?
Exactly. My dad used to tell me that after a certain point, he stopped trying to follow and understand technology, and he just let it all wash over him.
Yeah.
So I just sort of look forward to the point of my life when I'm old enough that everything is passing me by, and things just, like you said, start showing up on my doorstep, and I can just enjoy them for what they are. Little flights of fancy.
Yeah.
Speaking of flights of fancy.
Ooh, yes.
There was a very large flight of fancy and renown last week.
Yeah, from our favorite internet billionaire.
Yes, Mr. Elon Musk.
Ellen?
Ellen? Well,
you can't pronounce anything right.
well, who knows exactly how, I mean, there's how everybody else pronounces it, and then has anybody ever actually asked him?
All right, we'll go with Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, okay, yes. Yeah, and the Falcon Heavy, this ginormous rocket that shot a Tesla Roadster into space. Which, yes. By the way, the first time I heard of it, I was like, oh, what a publicity stunt, whatever. But then as I followed it and saw the pictures of it, man, that is pretty darn cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I watched it live on the internet.
Okay.
It was great fun. It's very impressive. But it's amazing to see all those young kids in that mission control for SpaceX. Just a huge swarm of millennials in there hooting and hollering. It's a far cry from the NASA mission control that we grew up with.
Okay, right. So the median age, you think, in ground control was slightly less than traditional?
Yeah, and slightly more boisterous as well.
Okay, right.
They really enjoy themselves in there. They need to I think they need to get a bit more serious when they start putting astronauts on these things, though.
Yeah.
It's kind of okay to let loose a little bit when you just got a car as the payload, but
Right.
It's time to get serious, guys. If you really want to start pushing the ball forward.
Yeah, toys versus human cargo are two different things.
Yeah, I believe they're going to start doing crewed flights later this year.
Wait, CRUDE or CREWED?
CREWED.
Okay, not crude, as in unrefined.
With astronauts aboard.
That's pretty exciting. Yeah, I liked watching the video of Mr. Musk running out of the control room to see it live outside. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like you said, it was a flight of fancy. They really doubled down on the whimsy there of having the dummy astronaut inside the car. They knew the PR value of the pictures they were going to get from that if the flight was successful.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, and the videos from, like, how did they shoot those videos? So I saw a video of the car in flight and then in space and the Earth behind it.
Yeah, they had a big rig on the upper stage of the rocket, so they could have a camera pointing back towards the front of the car.
Okay, yeah, that just looked amazing. Like you could not have drawn that up any better.
If you're going to shoot a car into space, you better do it right.
Exactly. And from what I understand, it's actually going to orbit the sun. It's going to be between, depending on where it is in the orbit, as far out as Mars and as far close in as Earth. And it's
yeah, actually, it's in a heliocentric orbit. When they fired the upper stage and sent it away from Earth, they basically just let it use up all its fuel, and they ended up in a orbit that's actually a little beyond Mars, somewhat towards the asteroid belt. So they exceeded what their design was.
okay.
So it's going to be orbiting the sun basically forever, shuttling between the orbits of roughly the Earth and Mars and the asteroid belt.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, and I saw that. So NASA tracks man-made objects in space for traffic reasons, and so now this is an officially tracked object, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I like that. It said "Don't panic" on the dashboard as well.
Yeah, they just really hit every little detail. So is the actual spacesuit guy driving the car, and now it was playing David Bowie's Space Tune there?
I don't think if that was actually happening aboard the car or not.
Okay.
I mean, there would be no way to propagate those sound waves. But they certainly played it on the live feed.
Right. I also read that there was a mini Hot Wheels car. It was a replica of the Tesla with a mini Starman in a spacesuit in that mini Hot Wheels car in the car.
Yep.
I also read about this other piece of the cargo, which I really wanted to get your take on. I don't know if you read about this. Did you hear about this ARC disk that was also on board?
Yep. The long duration archival material. What is it? It's kind of some sort of plastic disc or something. What is it made out of?
Oh, it's even further than that. Here, I'm going to send you a link, Tom.
All right.
I like to send you links.
I like to receive links.
All right. So I'm sending you the website of the company that constructed this. So they're called the Arch Mission Foundation.
Got it.
Okay. And according to their website, their mission is to preserve and disseminate humanity's most important information across time and space for the benefit of human generations. So they go on to describe how their purpose is, as you spoke of in our inaugural episode, offsite backup in case of extinction level events, which we also spoke of several episodes ago. And apparently this is an etched crystal material, so a very, very new way. The technique is called 5D optical storage, where they make very infinitesimal changes to the quartz. And so what you get is something that has an incredible amount of information density, as well as lasting long. So that was their whole thing, is that you want something that's going to last as long as possible. So they chose quartz as the material. And did you read what was the content that was on this disc?
It was Asimov, wasn't it?
Yeah, Asimov's Foundation.
There you go.
Which, by the way, have you read that yet?
I read, yeah, we talked about that. I read the first volume.
Right. So this isn't really spoilers because this is like the first chapter of the book. But in Foundation, these scientists see the galactic civilization is going to collapse imminently, and so they embark upon this Encyclopedia Galactica to store all of humanity's information.
Yeah.
And so that was very appropriate. It's funny too. They also talk about one of the reasons is not just to get offsite backup, but in terms of figuring out a data transfer method if we become a planet-faring species.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you can use lasers and stuff to transfer data, but there's an enormous amount of information that we've already collected, and so it might make more sense to store it and then store it and ship it, and then seed your base of knowledge as opposed to having to transfer it all over the air.
Yeah, I love any attempt to have long-term archives of human creations. So this is great.
Yeah. So now that's
anytime you can shoot something off into space and have it last for 1 billion years, that's great.
So their plan is to have they're calling it a lunar library. So they're going to take so when they say collected knowledge, they're still sort of figuring out what this means. But the standard issue things you might think of like Wikipedia and all that. So they want to put this a set of these things on the moon and on Mars, and then their current thinking is to just create many copies of these things and then just shoot them out into space. Millions of them.
Yeah.
As little seeds, which is kind of interesting.
Just as an aside, I'm looking at the website now, and I'm looking at the about page, and the co-founder and executive director of this organization is a guy called Nova Spivak.
It sort of sounds like a Douglas Adams character, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know. But I mean, when I saw that name, it immediately jumped out at me because I went to school with this guy.
What?
Yeah.
Did you seriously?
I did. Yeah, I knew him in like 10th grade. But he's from Massachusetts. He's local.
Wow. If you met him, would he remember you?
I doubt it. No, I just know him because of the name.
Okay.
Because he's got a distinctive name.
Right.
I knew he was in the same school, but I don't think I ever interacted with him.
Wow. Maybe you had a subconscious impact on him, Tom. Maybe you
No.
you seeded some thoughts within him.
No.
I'm gonna give you partial credit. If we have an extinction level event and the arc discs preserve our knowledge, I'm giving you some props on that. So I read an article with this guy about how this came to be. So he had like a brief Twitter exchange with Mr. Musk, who was then taken with this idea. And so they were talking to this guy about, okay, so you want to preserve knowledge for extinction level events and then disperse all this information into the universe. So then they asked him the question, like, well, why haven't we found these seeds of civilization and knowledge from other past civilizations? If the numbers and the projections about, likelihood of life and all that are to be believed, why aren't these encodings all over the place? So he gave kind of a cryptic answer, but he's like, well, what if you did want to leave a message many billions of years into the future and you didn't have the physical technology, what would you use? And so the other material that they're exploring is non-living DNA in order to encode messages and information because of its ability to preserve. I mean, we found, I think this is correct, we found DNA in fossils from many billions of years ago. So in terms of a data transfer mechanism, it's shown the ability to endure. So then he's like, okay, and also, if you talk to geneticists, there's this problem. I can't remember the name of it, but essentially in DNA, they've decoded the human genome, but by decoding we just mean we've mapped it out. So you could see all the A's, the C's, the T's, and the G's, but we don't yet know what each of those things do. And for the vast majority of the strand, it apparently is inert. It's not doing anything.
Yeah.
So if you were to try and encode a message to then later be discovered at the appropriate time by a civilization, this would be one way to do it. You would encode it in a long inert section of the species DNA, and then you would wait for that species to discover the hidden message lying therein. So you got some work ahead of you, Tom.
Yeah.
To play with some A's and C's and T's and G's.
That reminds me of an interesting article I came across a few years ago. Let me see if I can pull it up. About some studies a government agency did on trying to figure out the best way to communicate the dangers of a nuclear waste disposal site?
Yes, I was just talking to a climatologist about this recently.
Because nuclear waste can be dangerous for tens of thousands of years. And so if you're going to bury it in the ground, you got to have some sort of way of marking that so future generations will know to stay away from it. And having to come up with a communication method that will last through the millennia is a pretty tricky problem, right?
Right. Because not only do languages change and evolve, but even general symbolism. Like there's no guarantee, for example, that red will always mean danger.
Right.
So you can't just go stay away, boo boo.
Yeah. So when they were, they put a lot of smart people together to try to figure out ways to do this. They came up with a whole bunch of different ways to do it at different levels of messaging, I guess. I'm looking at the page now, and it says they created 4 different levels. The first level was just the rudimentary level, that something man-made is here. And that's it. That was what they tried to communicate. Level 2 in their process was cautionary information. Something man-made is here, and it is dangerous. Level 3 was basic information, tells you why, when, where, how, and who. And level 4 was complex information, highly detailed written records and stuff like that.
Right.
So they had to figure out how to communicate to future generations that there's potentially dangerous nuclear hazards there, and different ways. And then they did it in. They had, textual markings and stuff like that, but they also did it with architecture. Very forbidding and menacing and forbidding architecture to communicate the danger of an area rather than using words.
So, the first thing I think of that is if I was a group of alien adventurers to come upon this billions of years from now.
Yeah.
The very first thing I would want to do is just find out what's
I know, and that's part of the problem with it. If you find these big monumental architecture or something marking this area as being significant for some reason, you want to dig it up, but you also want to warn people away from it as well.
Yes. What do they say? The way to get anybody to open a file online is to call it "do not open.txt."
Yeah.
So my solution to this would be to create 10 samples of what was stored in there, each of gradually increasing severity. So you would start off with a radioactive sample that had some level of radiation, but it wasn't harmful.
Yeah.
And you would put it right out in the open as, big showcase. And then, 20 feet from there, you would put the next sample that would be like a little more intense. And then the next sample and the next sample. So it's implying that what's behind the door is more of this stuff. And so if you're okay with this stuff, then you can open the door. But if you don't want the effects of this stuff, then don't open the door.
Yeah.
I should have been on this team.
Yeah. That's an ongoing issue. If we're going to have nuclear waste that's going to outlive us, we got to find some way to dispose of it. Maybe we can shoot it off into space.
Yeah. So the reason this came up in conversation the other week is I was talking to a university professor who's really into trying to find solutions to climate change and transferring humanity's energy needs. And we always talk about renewables as the most refined solution. But the problem, as we've discussed before, is that this deadline is fast approaching and the planet has very high energy needs. And so the logistics of transferring everything over to renewables in time to avoid the really, really bad effects is getting less and less. So nuclear power has had kind of a renaissance. Back in the day when it was first coming online in the 60s, in that sort of era of flower power and hippies, it was environmentalists were very much against nuclear power.
Right.
But now it's at least for some environmentalists, it's having a resurgence, because as long as you can ensure safety of the disposal, and as long as you can ensure safety of the material so that it doesn't become acquired for weaponization and nefarious purposes,
right?
Very clean and efficient energy source.
That's right. Compared to all the fossil fuels and petroleum and stuff like that.
Exactly. And so it's kind of this do you make the deal with the devil? Bargain.
Yeah. What we need is fusion reactors rather than the dirty fission reactors we have now. And that's a clean energy source, fusion.
Now, I remember reading an article on fusion years ago,
Mhm.
and I could never really tell what people who really understood science thought about it, whether this was just a silly idea that would never have any practical purposes, or is this an inevitable energy source and we just really haven't figured out how to tap it yet?
I think so. I mean, fusion is what powers the sun.
Okay,
So
yes.
it certainly works. It's just a technological hurdle to get a working system that can be reliably used for clean energy.
So just for us non-nuclear scientists, fusion is taking atoms and mushing them together.
To make heavier elements, right? So hydrogen and helium smushing together to make things that aren't radioactive.
So that seems like it would take a lot of energy to do. So how does it produce energy? Like I can understand breaking the bond of an atom, and
Yep.
so that would be fission, right?
Yep.
And that releasing energy.
Well, the fusion process also releases energy as well.
Okay.
If you go through the actual equations, and as the atoms fuse together, there's energy that's released in that process, and that can be captured.
But we're not close to having the same level of generating capacity as fission today, right?
No, I don't think anyone's made a practical fusion reactor yet.
Yeah. So same kind of problem as renewables.
Right.
In terms of the clock is ticking.
Yeah.
Have we talked about the doomsday clock?
We have talked about it, and we should have a little follow up on that, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if we had followed up, but it has inched slightly closer, hasn't it?
Yeah, the last time we mentioned this, it was 2.5 minutes to midnight. This is the famous doomsday clock that is from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. It's their metaphorical representation of how close the Earth is to apocalypse.
Right.
And they've recently moved the clock forward, the symbolic clock forward, to 2 minutes to midnight from 2.5 minutes to midnight, which is the closest it's been to midnight ever.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's tied with 2 minutes to midnight, which they had back in the 50s during the height of the Cold War.
Oh my gosh.
So, well done, Earth.
Yeah, right. So by their assessment, the geopolitical conditions today are as close to nuclear war as the geopolitical conditions in, say, like the Bay of Pigs invasion.
No, before that, in the late 50s, when both the U.S. and the Soviets were testing thermonuclear weapons for the first time.
Oh, right. It's funny, when I was looking at, when I originally looked at this timeline, so back in the day, the bombs that dropped in World War II,
Yep,
and that were originally tested, that's a fundamentally different mechanism than the weapons we have today.
that's right.
It's not just that they've gotten bigger. It's like, do you understand the technical difference between the two? I couldn't quite put my...
Roughly. I mean, the initial atomic bombs were basically fission weapons. They took large cores of plutonium and uranium, and they split apart. The heavy duty thermonuclear weapons that we have now are basically fusion bombs. I believe they set off a smaller fission reaction to create a fusion reaction within it, and so it can produce a lot more energy from a fusion reaction than a fission reaction. Which is why fusion reactors are potentially a great source of energy if they can get them working correctly.
Yeah.
But they're much more powerful weapons than the first wave of atomic weapons we created in the 40s.
Yeah, as unimaginably destructive as the World War II weapons were, I don't think that there is a general good public understanding of the destructive power of today's nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I mean, if the combined nuclear arsenals of all the major superpowers went off, I mean, the Earth would be essentially uninhabitable for humans.
Yeah. So it's like, I mean, we think of like, oh, we had a little dust up and we had some exchange of weapons, and then it's like, any little bit of exchange of any of these things is going to be just ridiculous. Yeah. So I suppose then this clock is commenting on the current posture of the nuclear armed countries of the world.
Yeah, specifically North Korea
and the U.S.
Yeah,
not to let ourselves off the hook.
Right, of course. But the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists are also including the threats of climate change in this assessment as well.
Oh, that's right. So it's not just
not just the nuclear apocalypse. It's a climate apocalypse too, is what they're warning about.
Okay, go USA.
Ugh.
I think we had journeyed here from the Doomsday Clock, and nuclear power, and Falcon.
Yeah.
That was our original liftoff launching point.
Yeah.
So
So looping back all the way to the Falcon Heavy, I follow a lot of people on Twitter that have to do with the space industry and astronomy in general.
Mm-hmm.
And I I could detect a little bit of grumbling about this launch among the some of the space professionals out there for two reasons. One, there's a little bit of disappointment, I think, that they launched this rocket and it basically just had a frivolous payload.
Right.
They didn't have any space to put any actually science on there,
Right.
So that's kind of a lost opportunity. But although I have sympathy for that view, but you need the frivolousness as well occasionally.
Well, it's like we've talked before about how this stuff isn't cheap. And so if you're ever going to have any kind of public effort into this, you need to capture the imagination.
Yes, it as a inspirational moment, I think it was worthwhile.
Yeah. Like 10 years from now, if you ask people, name me one rocket launch that you remember, this will be at the top of the list.
Yeah.
Far ahead of all the many other hundreds of highly effective scientific missions. So
yeah. The other thing that some folks were grumbling about was how they exceeded their initial intentions to put it in a orbit that approached Mars. So now it's somewhat further towards the asteroid belt. So there's some concern for potential contamination of the asteroid belt, because I don't think the car was assembled in a clean room.
Right.
Like any space object that goes towards an unexplored body, they rightly so worry about potential contamination of Earth microbes.
Microbes that could survive that long in space?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Huh. Okay. Now you can help me enlighten me on this part then. How could you have a microbe survive for that long? Maybe I didn't understand the state of life that is a microbe.
There's things that can survive in the vacuum of space. Like those, what are they called? Water bears. They can survive all kinds of harsh environments.
Whoa, water bears? Dude, that doesn't sound safe.
The tardigrades.
Well, dude, what are you talking about?
Tardigrade. It's a microscopic animal that is almost indestructible. You can put it through anything and it'll survive.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Tardigrade.
Mm-hmm. Look it up.
And it's alive.
It's alive. Yeah. It's got legs.
Shut up. How can something survive in space? I'm really feeling stupid right now. Spell for me this tardigrade thing.
Tardy, as in TARDIS, and then grade, as in grade.
Water-dwelling, 8-legged, segmented microanimals.
Yeah.
Whoa. I never knew these puppies existed.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm just reading the Wikipedia here. They can survive exposure to extreme temperatures, extreme pressures, air deprivation, radiation, dehydration, and starvation.
Dude, that sounds like the way to go.
Yeah, this is like the ideal form of life.
Seriously, like instead of trying to upload our consciousness to the Matrix, we should be trying to transfer it to tardigrades.
Mm-hmm.
These monkey suits are a little damaging,
Further down here, it says tardigrades are the first known animal to survive in space.
Wow.
Dehydrated tardigrades were taken into low Earth orbit. For 10 days, tardigrades were exposed to the hard vacuum of outer space. After being rehydrated back on Earth, over 68% of the subjects revived within 30 minutes.
Wow. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So they have to worry about these things. If they're going to send spacecraft to environments out in space, they have to make sure they're scrubbed clean. I don't think Elon's Tesla was scrubbed clean before it, but maybe it has. Maybe it was.
You mean they should participate in a tardigrade genocide prior to shooting the... Seriously, dude. So we just talked about, these extinction level events, like all this terribleness that the combined nuclear arsenals of the world could accomplish. So if that could wipe out, the vast majority of life, why don't we want to seed the rest of the solar system with these very hardy, intrepid space bears?
Well, the reason is because then once you actually study these places, if there's already life there, you don't know whether you contaminated the place or it already arrived by some other means or was developed or evolved in situ, so to speak.
But aren't you taking an equally calculated risk that it's devoid of life. And so if we allow ourselves to destroy ourselves, which is going the doomsday clock, not a completely outside chance, then we're wiping all life out of the solar system. We have an obligation to not just spread ourselves, but to spread all life.
Yeah. So, I mean, if the doomsday clock is so close to going off, we should overcome these concerns about contamination and just spew our seed wherever we can.
So there's no evidence, right, that there's life outside the solar system.
None that we found. Correct.
Right. And there's abundant evidence that we have these wicked hardy microbears.
Yep.
And further, all life, including Homo sapiens, evolved from a form unrecognizable at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you take these essentially really hardy seeds of the genetic code, and I'm sure there's probably some article, you know how we share, 90% of our, or more, of our DNA code with a banana?
Right, exactly, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So in terms of preserving even if we're self-centered, preserving our form of life, pretty much take anything, you have the vast majority of what it is to be us, at least on a DNA level.
Mm-hmm.
You take billions of these little tardigrades and you spew them out into the universe. Then at least you have a point from which life could evolve further.
So, yeah, I mean, they should have packed the trunk of the Tesla full of these guys, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm just saying, wow, it seems to be an awful lot of concern for a planet that has no evidence of life versus this planet that is teeming with life. Yeah. So, I don't know. It seems like somewhat of a double, maybe single and a half standard. Tardigrades, man. Those look pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Can you get these at like the pet store or something?
I don't know. Where do they live? They must live in water, right? Because they're called water bears. They have been found everywhere from mountaintops to the deep sea and mud volcanoes from tropical rainforests to the Antarctic. So, hey, they're everywhere then.
Let's see. And fossils as far back as 500 million years ago in the Cambrian. Good for them.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're right. We should be sending these guys out into space. So they should be representatives of the Earth.
Seriously.
Not Asimov.
Oh, you know what you could do is, a couple hundred years from now, once we've mucked with altering DNA sequencing,
mm-hmm.
Once we understand how to flip all those switches on and off, you take the DNA of the tardigrade and you flip the switches in a certain sequence such that hundreds of millions of years from then, they'll evolve into humans. So you just look at them as pre-humans that have been configured appropriately.
Yeah.
And then you spew them out.
We'll get humans with 8 legs and funny looking snouts.
Yeah, that seems somewhat convenient. Rock and roll, tardigrades. I think we're coming in for our conversational landing, Tom.
Okay. Will we do it in sync? Side by side?
Did you see the video, the rockets landing down?
Yeah, that was cool too. I mean, it's totally made possible by the super fast computers we can have on these rockets now. I mean, it's cool to see them do this, but it's understandable that they can do this now because we have guidance systems that can react in a fraction of a second to stabilize these things as they're coming down.
Right. And, kudos to SpaceX. Like, they were the ones that said, we're going to try and do this first.
Yep.
And very much like it seems to me very much like the first person who ever ran a 5-minute mile. Like, before that, everyone said it was impossible. And then as soon as the first person did it, then dozens of people started doing it.
Yeah.
This sort of mentally imposed hurdle of your operating within a particular framework of rules.
Yeah. It feels like we're going to get a lot of really cool space stuff in the next 10, 20 years. We've kind of been in a lull for the past 50 years where we landing on the moon was certainly a pinnacle of human achievement, and we've been kind of like laying fallow since then.
Right. Pretty soon, ground control to Major Tom. It's probably not gonna take a while though. I'm not so sure you're gonna get your dream ticket to Mars though, buddy.
Yeah,
I'm a little bummed for you.
I have some follow up on our discussion about Wi-Fi.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you saw this. There was a news report that came out in the past week or so about a new study that was just announced where they exposed rats to high levels of cell phone radiation for an extended period.
Okay.
This is an NIH funded study that was studying the risks of specifically cellular phones.
And so is the wavelength of cell phone EM radiation same order of magnitude as Wi-Fi? Are we talking about the same thing here?
It's around the same. Yeah, it's
Okay.
around the same radio frequency. But this was a kind of worst case scenario study where they just blasted these rats with the worst case scenario that you can get with cell phone radiation.
Right. Like you have 1,000 cell phones strapped to your body downloading movies all the time.
Right, because if you test the worst case scenario first, and if you have results there, then you can dial it back a little. But
Exactly. And the NIH, reputable source.
right,
Okay.
right, and so the findings were that 6% of the male rats that were exposed to this high level of cellular radiation developed a rare type of heart cancer.
Okay.
None of the female rats did, and none of the mice that they also ran in the same experiment did as well. So, not definitive, but they did see some result with male rats, a very, very small uptick in cancer.
Right.
Nothing that they said anyone needs to be concerned about.
Right.
But the interesting thing about this was, and the reason I bring it up, is that in this study, they also found that the irradiated rats overall lived longer than the control group. So the rats that were blasted with the radiation 24/7
Right.
lived longer than the rats that weren't.
All right. So what you're telling me is I should be taking a Wi-Fi rudder shower every morning if I want to extend my life here.
Yeah, the speculation was that the radiation provided some sort of anti-inflammatory effect on the rats, and so they didn't acquire other conditions that the rats were prone to.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, so I would imagine anybody reading this who is predisposed to strongly believe that Wi-Fi causes cancer would pick up on this and say, look, there's proof.
The uptick of 6% of male rats, which is weird too. I didn't see any explanation of why it was just male rats.
Right, right.
Maybe they're heavy users of YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the fact that, an environmental condition could then cause some apparently positive benefit like living longer is interesting.
Right.
The idea of epigenetics, right, that you have some dormant part of your genetic code. Like we were just talking about this genetic issue of vast majority of it, we don't know what it does. Perhaps a lot of that is for the possibility of epigenetics, where there's some sort of conditions that come in, then activate that strand in order to produce some effect. Like maybe if they had continued the Wi-Fi, they may have had flying rats after a couple hours, right? We human beings, Tom, we're just waiting for the conditions to be ripe, and then it's going to click over, and then all of a sudden, we'll be seeing through walls and stuff.
X-Men.
What do you think, man? Let's do it. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, so I don't imagine that the layman is going to get any solace from that report. They just focus on the 6% of the male rats and be upset.
Well, I just thought I'd throw that out there since that came up since the last time we talked about this.
Yeah. I'll keep my rat tribe away from the cell phones. How's that?
Yep.
Sweet. Once we get through our topics in a record session.
Yep.
And then we pick up any little tangents that may have arisen over the course of the conversation.
Yep.
And then, lightheartedly joke around a bit.
Yep.
My mind gets into this at the very end, like now.
Yeah.
It gets into this very quiet space. It's like it's a sponge, but it's squeezed everything out. And so now it's like, I feel very like, I don't know. It's like my mind has taken a shower. It's all the chaff has been cleared away. It's nice.
Yeah.
It's a nice service you provide me, Tom.
Wringing out your brain every 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, it's like, the brain is so full of chatter 24/7 that to have a conscious moment when it's not so full of little expressions is nice. And you provide this to me, Tom, through your own efforts.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, gang. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to help support the podcast, we have some new t-shirt options now available on the website, including 2 Bit Geeks shirts in black. Bewilder your friends and family while showing your support for your favorite obscure podcast.